Hi guys, what is going on, and welcome back to another video on Conqueror's Blade. So today we are on the PTR, the Season 7 preview server, and we are checking out some of the new Season 7 units. So the Shield Maidens, the Berserkers, and the new, what we just call Wolf guys, Sons of Fenrir. And I just kind of wanted to test them out, how they are performing against some of the units that are currently in the game, see what their ability is like, see the ones that we are most excited for, and get a bit of a deep dive into some of their stats. Don't worry, the Shield Maidens do not come with a beard. It's an optional beard. It just amused me. So Shield Maidens are the tier 5 unit that we're going to be getting in Season 7. What an interesting unit, but perhaps not as amazing as I initially thought they might be. They get a reasonable amount of defense, 11,000 hit points, and defensive stat-wise, they're not amazing, but they're pretty decent. I played around with both veterancy lines. I just kind of ended up settling on the bottom because that's where the predominance of their extra damage is coming from, and kind of the natural way I tend to go. They do change a few things. They have a few things against cavalry and stuff like that, which is kind of interesting to check out. We'll kind of go and see how they compare against charging cavalry, against Laos, how they compare against things like Paladins and stuff like that, see how they perform. They have two weapons. They have both a spear and a sword. So in spear mode, they're much more of a defensive unit, performing a bit more like a stalwart, where they sort of hold the position, and a sword unit performing a bit much more like a paladin. They do have a charge when they're in sword mode, and they also have what they're calling a triple strike, which is like a shield bash AoE ability where they sort of step and swing only when they're in sword mode. So it's kind of interesting to see. They obviously have a cover commander, and when in spear mode, they have a guardian, which is kind of like a Shiltron formation, which is like a hold the area, gives them like various buffs and things. So kind of interesting to see. So let's hop into some of the battles with them, see how we've been getting on. So the first thing that I really wanted to test was their performance versus cavalry. So pulled out some Laos and was actually really surprised with the result. It seems that Shield Maidens hold up against Laos. And this is in the Guardian mode, so they form this sort of Shiltron around. And while they don't seem to actually perform any stun versus the Laos, it seems that their bludgeon no longer can break through the block, and so they're actually unable to kill the unit. So initial impressions for these Shield Maidens was actually really good. So I thought, okay, what about against charging cavalry? Yeah, so that didn't go quite so well. So it seems for the Laos it works because their bludgeon can't break the block, so they don't actually end up causing any hit damage against the unit really. But they don't actually, because the Shield Maidens don't actually cause any stun, it kind of results in the fact that they don't break through the unit in this sort of situation. And they don't actually cause the unit to stun, so the unit pushes through them in the charge. So then I wanted to test the block against range. So he pulled out some Pavis, and that double shot is absolute insanity. And in the Guardian formation, we take a light amount of damage. Some of the shots hit through. It's not crazy, there's not a supreme amount of damage, but it does hit through. But then when you test it in the Shield Wall formation, frontally facing against the Pavis, we actually take 0 damage, no damage at all. And it's worth pointing out in this, that little healing doctrine you can see on number 4 is just that. It's an epic doctrine. It's not actually a unit-specific ability, which is why I'm not using the heal. But they take no damage from Pavis in the Shield Wall formation, which is kind of interesting to see. So then I thought, okay, how do they perform against Stalwarts? Went to the sword mode, went for the charge, and was pretty disappointed. They did actually no damage at all on the charge. So I then activated my triple strikes, started pushing forwards with the shield bash and swing. Okay, this is starting to be a bit more effective. We are at least causing some damage now. But the bracing damage of the Stalwarts is really starting to pick up. And yeah, the unit is really starting to diminish. In that sort of situation, I would expect a Paladin unit to have done quite a bit better than that. So that kind of became my next port of call, and I wanted to check out how the Paladins performed. So I put them both into sword mode and charged them both directly at each other. Actually, it took us a few attempts to get them to sort of directly collide properly, but when they do, it seems that by and large it's a pretty equal fight from the off. I go on with the self-heal on my Paladins, and Ham Banana, who's helping me, goes on with the triple strikes with his unit, and actually the Shield Maidens then start to gain the upper hand. and they start to take the advantage over the Paladins, and eventually they wipe them out. Although it does cost them about half for the unit for them to actually end up achieving this. So obviously it would have been nice to test a lot more against these guys, but I've only got one evening to try and get this done, and I wanted to get the video out tomorrow or today now as you're watching it, so we couldn't test every possible combination. I really wanted to see how they were performing against Cav, and I was also curious against things like Stalwarts and Paladins, which are kind of their naturally rivaled units. You know, the shield is what's making, and the spear is what's making them a Stalwart type unit, and obviously the sword is where they sort of perform as a Paladin style unit. So it was interesting to see the combination of the two. Certainly an interesting unit, not going to be crazy dominant, I don't think, but it's certainly still going to be an effective unit on the battlefield. So the second unit we've been getting on the testing is the Berserkers. These are the tier 4, 4.5 star, 8-man axe-wielding monsters is really the only word to describe them. So when we first saw the footage of these, when they released a little bit of info on them, I thought, oh dear, 8-man unit. You know, it's like half the strength of an Iron Reaper. It's going to be disappointing, and I really did not have very high hopes for these guys. And then I clicked on the Veterancy tab, and then I saw they had almost 19,000 hit points, and they are absolutely crazy. They are all about the slashing damage and have really high base slashing AP and damage. But they also work in functionality with a rage bar. So as they attack other units, they build up rage, and that rage can then be used to do things like Berserker Assaults, which is like an AoE swing, and things like Frenzy. More importantly, like that, as they get stuck into some of these attacks, they get stacks of high spirits. And these stacks basically increase their damage resistance, and if they stack up to 10 times, Berserkers start to recover hit points. And then that is basically resulting in them almost self-healing through the fighting. So the more they kill, the more they resist damage, and the more they heal, and the more damage they actually end up doing. I ended up going down the top line because, well, basically seemed to be damage along with the movement speed, double strike, things like that. And you also get, when Frenzy finishes, so once you finish this ability, you get an instant 2,000 hit point heal, which is really quite nice. It kind of keeps them going. They are a really cool unit. Easily so far my favourite unit in the game from the testing this is. They're not going to do so well in those really big scale fights. If you can isolate units on your own, these guys are absolutely going to cut them to what's going to make them really interesting. Let's hop into some of the battles, see how we've been getting on with them. So for the first clip, I kind of wanted to explain how the rage bar works. So as you can see in the bottom left of the screen, you can see the little orange bar which represents their rage. Now as I charge in, I start to do a little bit of damage, and so I gain a little bit of range. But I then consume some range to use my 2 ability. But as I continue to do damage, I actually very slowly gain a little bit of range. But it's not actually enough to get me up to my Frenzy ability. Not before I was going to die. So I decided to pull the unit away. But then 1 unit of Serfs later, I've now got a full rage bar. And it's important to understand that the rage bar never goes down unless you use it. It doesn't tick down over time is what I mean. So I'm able to go in and start beating in Frenzy against the front of the unit. This means I no longer have any control over the unit, but they are starting to beat and cut away at the front of these Shield Maidens. And okay, we're not immediately cutting them to pieces, but the damage we are doing with them is actually enough to self-heal the Berserkers quicker than the Shield Maidens can actually do damage. So yes, it actually takes us quite a long time to cut through the Shield Maidens because they still have a pretty insane amount of block. But actually, they can't do any more damage to us than I can self-heal in terms of doing damage to them. So I can just keep the damage up, keep pushing in, and that Frenzy helped to get that initial surge of damage in. So that rage bar only ever goes down if I use the 2 ability or go into Frenzy mode with the 3 ability. It never ticks down on its own. And against this unit of Shield Maidens on their own, eventually the Berserkers are able to get enough damage in and eventually break the block and wipe the unit. I then wanted to test them against Paladins, and, well, as you'll see, it's actually a complete slaughter. We take a little bit of damage at the start, but as we start to get stuck in, the self-healing actually starts to take over, and as we start to overwhelm the unit of Paladins and Frenzy goes on, they just get cut to pieces. Although kind of interestingly, you get to see a little bit here, one of the downsides of the Frenzy is the fact you have no control as they then go charging off with a poor hand banana as he has to try and make a run for it because I lose control of the unit. I then wanted to try against the Paladin Charge, and you can see the difference. The Paladin Charge does a really large amount of damage to the Berserker, and because they've lost the edge, they're never quite able to catch up on the self-heal with themselves. And even with the Frenzy on, and while they'll get a few kills, they're never able to sort of get back up to where they were. And because they lost that initial advantage, they get themselves killed quite easily. So this then opens up the question, what counters Berserkers? And initially, I thought I'd found the answer. I thought these Fortebraccios had really done the job, and they actually kill quite a chunk of the unit. But a couple of them are able to get in range, and now the pikes can no longer do the damage, and the unit absolutely goes to work and just cuts through these remaining Fortebraccio and just smashes the unit to pieces in a few seconds. So if you can avoid the front of a Fortebraccio, then these Berserkers will absolutely go to town on it. We then thought Azaps might be a naturally quite a good counter to these Berserkers, and yeah, it turns out they were. The Berserkers just can't get their damage on. The counter strikes means we can't get the damage in, so that means they're also losing their self-heal. And even when they go into madness mode, yeah, okay, they get a bit of damage in, but they just get overwhelmed really quite quickly. We get a few kills, but it's not enough to make any significant impact. Azaps clearly are superior to the Berserkers in one-on-one fights. And so that's Berserkers. They are easily the unit I'm most looking forward to playing. I think they're really, really interesting. They're going to have be a little bit situational, I think. But when they work, when they can sort of overwhelm those units, they just absolutely slaughter them. And I think that's where it's going to be really exciting. And it's also interesting how effectively they kill enemy heroes as well, particularly in frenzy mode. That's crazy. So certainly my favourite unit. And of course the final unit we're going to be getting this season, or I guess actually the first unit we're going to be getting this season, because I've done it in reverse order, kind of because I assumed you'd want to see the Shield Maidens the most rather than these guys. Seem to be called Favoured Sons, Sons of Fenrir, whatever version of naming we're going to get. And the tier 3 jumpy wolf boys, let's just call them that. Probably the most entertaining unit, but also by quite a long way the worst, at least in my experience so far. It's kind of cool in an idea that they can jump over shield walls and stuff. But the problem is, in reality, it just doesn't really work. They don't seem to get enough jump distance to clear stalwarts in column or pipe militia in column or anything like that. Just doesn't seem to be really very effective that often at clearing stuff. And if you do manage to clear a wall, then the unit just turns around and kills you anyway, because the damage isn't all that high. So, all in all, interesting unit. They are quite fast and mobile, so they'll probably be okay at trying to flank and kill some of the enemy archers and stuff, because they do get some interesting buffs in things like to reduce range damage they take. They might be okay at being able to sort of flank and quickly attack, undefended units of archers and that sort of thing. But I think all in all, they're not going to be a particularly meta unit. Even though they do have 10,700 hit points, but defensive stat-wise, they are really, really quite low. So let's hop in, see some of the... Let's literally hop in. That wasn't an intended pun. Let's literally hop in and see some of these guys jumping around and see what they're like in action. So initially I wanted to try them against the pipe militia. Tried them in column, and they do manage to get some of their jump off, but they just land in the middle of a pipe militia, and it just turns into a giant stun fest. I mean, it's comical. And yeah, the whole unit of Sons of Fenrir just gets completely wiped. They managed to kill 4 pipe militia. So I thought, I know, I'll try them in line. But it seems to not really get off quite properly because it's a double stack. They can't seem to get the jump because they get stunned before the jump actually hits because the back row is standing up. And so maybe 2 or 3 of them manage to get over the pipe militia line behind and do a little bit of damage. But the bulk of them end up just getting stunned to death, apart from one random little sneaky guy who manages to just get into position and stop the pipe militia from getting back into brace. So then I thought, well, let's give them a quick whirl against the Shield Maidens. What's the worst that could happen? And they do actually manage to jump over quite well. And they look quite cool as they do it. But unfortunately, the Shield Maidens auto turn round. It wasn't a controlled thing. They did that naturally. And so then the Sons of Fenrir, or the Favoured Sons, are just facing the front of the unit. So it didn't really help them all that much, even with the abilities activated. They don't die instantly, but they don't actually manage to get any kills, unfortunately, against the Shield Maidens, and they just slowly get whittled away. I did try this again against Stalwarts, but I don't know quite what I've done with the footage. I've lost it somewhere. But similar effect to the Pipe Militia. In the block formation, they just end up jumping into the middle of the block. And in the line, yeah, it kind of works. Half of them seem to get stunned before they jump over, and then there's no reason why the stalwarts wouldn't just turn around and brace into the new direction, and that effectively just kills them almost instantly. So that really sums up my overview for the 3 new units that we're getting in Season 7 so far. Berserkers are the one I'm really looking forward to, but I think Shield Maidens are going to be quite a nice sort of solid unit as well. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Any comments, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. And of course, subscribe to the channel for a lot more Conqueror's Blade content. Thanks for watching, guys.